Hello, Booktube. It's Tuesday, and that means Tag Tuesday hereabouts in Booktube land. And I have a tag for you. A tag that apparently I have not done, even though it's right up my alley. I saw it on Mark Richardson's channel just today, and then followed the links and realized I've seen it on a bunch of other channels as well. He linked a few others. Uh, it's the What Makes Me Pick Up a Book tag. Very bookish, very conversational, not so much a question of finding books on shelves, is just chatting about them, which I love. So I thought we would do this tag for Tag Tuesday, even though I made a tag yesterday. And question number one is, do you judge a book by its cover? And no, I don't. Of course I don't. I judge the cover, absolutely, on aesthetic grounds, on effectiveness, that sort of thing. You've all seen me do that a million times. So many books have such terrible, terrible covers, when a small amount of creativity would have fixed them. Even oftentimes, a book will have a terrible, crappy cover when a small amount of creativity with that current cover would have made it more eye-catching. Always mystifies me. It always mystifies me, especially when since we all shop online now, it's never been more competitive. For the value of an eye-catching cover has never been higher. So I judge the book's cover as a cover, definitely, but I don't judge anything at all about the book by the cover. Not least because most of the books that I read don't have covers. I'm those of you who are new to this channel, I'm a professional book reviewer, and if I'm not reading a bound galley copy that doesn't yet have cover art, then I'm reading a preliminary ebook file that doesn't have cover art. So, well, I know I don't judge the contents of the book by the cover at all. No, not at all. And the gist of that answer is going to haunt us throughout most of the rest of these answers on this tag, because it points to a way in which my answers will probably line up a little differently than most people who do this tag, because I don't tend to buy new books in bookstores. I don't tend to do anything like that. I tend to get them, and my responsibilities towards them sometimes, a great deal of the time, are very different from just a casual reader, because I have an audience and I have a readership and I usually have a commission, and I am going to review the book. I'm in a critical relationship with the author, not just an aesthetic relationship with the book. But we'll see how that all shakes out. Number two, focusing just on the cover. What attracts you to pick it up? And I want to stress that a wide variety of things can attract me to a book's cover. All across the spectrum. There's really no one central yardstick. I mean, just take a glance at some of the books that I've got here. See, it's a wide variety of things. It could be practically anything that would attract my eye. So there isn't there isn't any one aesthetic standard. No, I don't like. There's some things I don't like. I don't like blurry, pointless, faded sepia tone photos on works of history, just because the person in the art department never reads history and thinks, "Oh, this is kind of boring. It should probably have a boring cover." I don't like that at all. And Bill Rutenberg, from the Rutenberg Library, who did this tag himself, mentioned the historical works of David Hackett Fisher that don't do that have extremely evocative period paintings of commemorating the events involved. That can sometimes be more expensive than, for instance, an archival photo, but nevertheless, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it in the long run. Question number three, do you read the synopsis first or prefer to go in without knowing anything about the book? Again, this is going to impinge on the fact that most of the reading that I do so-called professionally. I don't actually approach most books any other way, even if I'm not commissioned to review them. And so I read everything I can about them first. Yes, long before they're available, long before there's even a preliminary unbound galley or an e-copy or whatever, long before that, I am reading everything I can about them. And oftentimes I will have a long history with their author. And I will almost always, have a very long history with their subject matter. And the more I am mulling that over, the more I'm sort of getting ready the more I'm ready when I finally encounter the book. So yeah, I read everything there is to know about it. I've seen some booktubers I absolutely love who aren't critics, who will go at a book knowing literally nothing about it at all and liking it that way. And I can see the appeal in that, but it would be a waste of my time and my reader's time and my editor's time for me to do that. No, I go in loaded for bear. I go in knowing as much as I possibly can. And that's gonna echo on in a couple of other questions. Number 4 is, do you have any auto-buy authors? Of course, this makes my skin crawl a little, because buying retail books, oh my, that is so expensive. I auto-read, certainly. But I'd like to think that would be true of a great number of authors, even if they haven't earned my good graces. Plenty of them have. For instance, one that's on my mind just now is the historian Robin Lane Fox, who's been doing great work for his entire professional career. He has a new book coming out in November. And I see that, and again, the critical tumblers start moving around inside my head. I start thinking, okay, I have a long and very positive relationship with this author, and now he has a new book, and now I know the subject of that new book, so I can start to try and piece together ways that he has fainted at that subject in the past, approaches that he may take, maybe predisposition weaknesses that any author might have towards the subject, but something like that. Robin Lane Fox, I'm going to want to read. Whatever book that he does, I'm going to want to read. Same thing with Robert Alter's translations. Same thing with the action-adventure thrillers of Mark Greaney, for instance, and a bunch of other things, and science fiction and mystery, a bunch of other names. I'm assuming that's a fair answer to this question. Not so much auto-buy as auto-read. Are you there, baby? Oh, you are. Baby, come on, come in. She doesn't so much want to see you, but she didn't want to be away from you. She was one room away, and that's too far away. She is here, though. Aren't you, baby? A squeeze. Oh. That was a little belch. You got a little belch for looking at her. So I guess that would be my answer to auto-buy authors, to be auto-read. There are a whole bunch of authors for good and bad reasons. Like, for instance, I would never miss a new Martin Amis. I certainly won't miss the new Cormac McCarthy if it ever shows up, even though I can't stand those authors. And I may be pleasantly surprised. I don't know if it was pleasantly surprised, but I was very much surprised by the new Martin Amis. Then let's see here. Question number 5. Are you more likely to pick up a book if it includes specific elements/themes? For example, LGBTQ plus, mental health rep, disability rep. I have been informed by those who would know that is an obnoxious abbreviation for representation, more representation. Rep now stands for representation. And I don't know what to make of this question. On the one hand, it seems to be saying, do I buy books specifically for their woke virtue signaling labels? And I do not. Obviously, I do not. But on the other hand, on another reading, it's do you buy books with specific elements that interest you? And of course, if that is true, do you buy books on subjects that interest you? Then the answer is yes. I look for subjects that interest me, which is kind of self-evident. Although, because of the position that I'm in, because I get lots and lots of books that I don't solicit, that I don't ask for, and that I know nothing about, I am constantly learning to be interested in new things. But if that aspect, that reading of the question, are you more likely to read a book if it includes specific elements? I'm certainly more likely to be interested if I know that some book is about the Northern Renaissance or the Malmedy Massacre or whatever, a subject that I'm interested in, a subject that I've read a lot about, then I'm going to be interested in that book. Although I would like to think that wouldn't make me any more or less inclined to pick it up than the books on either side of it, that might be on subjects I don't know anything about, but that would interest me. The specific examples that are given here get my hackles up, and maybe that's unfair. Maybe they shouldn't. My hackles shouldn't be up. The specific examples that I mentioned here are usually used not as yardsticks for people to measure how much they're interested in a book, but yardsticks for people to watch how little other people are interested in the same books and then drag them on Twitter for that fact as being bigots. And I know that's probably the last thing in the world that was intended by the writer of the question, but the specific lineup of these labels gets under my skin just a bit. But in terms of am I more likely to pick up a book if it has a specific theme? I am. I have to work against that. Otherwise, I would become one of those reviewing parodies who's written 900 reviews all on the same subject, all on the Third Crusade. That's a good way to be a specialist on the subject, but it makes you mighty dull, and I must make the work mighty dull. I prefer to be sort of a hired gun who will write about anything. That's a lot more fun. Question number 6. Do you read a book that has generally negative reviews just to form your own opinion of it? I don't read a book that has generally negative reviews just to form my own opinion of it. I read every book just to form my own opinion of it. The negative reviews don't affect the trajectory of that at all. But I'm always very interested if a book is garnering lots of negative reviews. Of course, most books don't. The obverse is the thing that interests me on a practical day-to-day level a lot more likely, is that the book is garnering tons and tons of positive reviews. One after another, including reviewers who I know read each other and maybe talk with each other and who read each other first. If a review of a book comes out in Publishers Weekly and it's favorable, and then a few weeks later Library Journal reviews it and that is favorable, and the author maybe is ticking the right social progressive boxes, and then the first mainstream reviewer reviews the book and calls it the greatest thing since the Ascension of Jesus Christ, and then in just the amount of time necessary to write and file a review, a second reviewer who maybe has read that first review also does the same thing. That's how bandwagons form, where all of a sudden the mediocrity is being praised to the skies. And I pay very much attention to that. Yes, absolutely I do. On the one hand, there's the faint 1 in a million chance that chorus of approval is legitimate, that it's warranted. It's extremely rare, but it does happen. Like, for instance, if we would use just this latest book season, Piranesi by Susanna Clark, had one reviewer after another saying, including the professional journals months before anybody else got it, saying, well, this is remarkably good. This is incredibly involving and poetic and just a joy to read. And that chorus of approval turned out to be true. And you might be asking, well, how do you know that it turned out to be true? What yardstick are you using? Of course, I'm using the yardstick that you also should use, which is me. If I read that chorus of approval, and then I read the book, and I agree with the chorus of approval, then the chorus of approval was correct. But yeah, but I'm forming my own opinion on the book either way. Chorus of approval, chorus of disapproval, none of that's going to affect my reading of the book at all. I'm still going to do what I've often said on this channel, which is hold the book up in my mind and turn it all the way around with everything else shut off. Turn it all the way around, upside down like that, and say, what is this? What do you think of this? And once I've got some answers there, then I can start to double check with everybody else. Question number 7. Do you ever buy a book? There's that phrase again. Try not to buy new books. Do any of you actually go to retail bookstores and just buy books? I guess if you have a membership, like a loyalty discount card at a place like Barnes & Noble, it can be a little less expensive, but it still must pile up. Then again, some of you are drastically overcompensated at your jobs. So maybe you have a book buying budget that allows for retail book buying. Do you ever buy a book just because another booktuber or book blogger has reviewed it or talked a lot about it? This has happened to me. Usually it's not a discovery. Usually it's a reconsideration. And usually it's used. So I'm not out a lot of money, like for instance $1 at the Brattle bookshops, or free at a charity thrift shop of some kind or other, where I will have watched my usual 300 booktube videos in a week, and I will have seen maybe somebody, maybe I subscribe to a booktube channel that's usually not all that exciting. Usually maybe the person makes one video a month and they seem a little subdued when they're doing it. I always attribute that to nervousness. I don't ever assume the person is dull. Sometimes I will subscribe to a channel like that, and I will see they have a new video. I'll dip in, and suddenly there'll be a complete change in their voice, a complete change in their mannerism. Suddenly it'll be, I can't wait to talk to you about this. I'm so excited about this book that I've forgotten to be nervous. I've forgotten to be self-conscious. And almost always, I mean 99.9% of the time, it's a book that I already know about, maybe have already read, maybe have already reviewed. And if that enthusiastic response is different from the one I had, I will often pay it attention, serious attention. I will often say, well, okay, this moved you so much that it pushed you right out of your usual narrative box. So it was real. In other words, you're not feigning that at all. Or if conversely, I will be watching a booktuber who is natural in front of the camera, and their eyes will just twinkle, and they will say, well, this wasn't what I was expecting. I thought it was fantastic. They'll hold it up, and I'll say, oh yeah, I know you. We go way back. And then they'll start to talk about it, and suddenly I'll think, all right, maybe I don't know you. Or I've never thought about it that way, the way this person is enthusing about it. If that happens on a Monday, and the following Wednesday I'm confronted with a gigantic table full of dirt cheap used books, and one of those books is that book, then I universally grab it. I don't ever let that opportunity go. And reread it, and often re-estimate. And that is invaluable. Just invaluable. So for me, Booktube is not really a place where I go for book recommendations in the sense of learning about a book. Because that's kind of my job. If I were learning about books from Booktube, I would there would be a problem. No offense to Booktube, but you know what I mean. There would be a problem if that were true. Instead, the recommendations that I get from Booktube are enthusiasm recommendations, and those are great. Those are fantastic. Where somebody will hold up a book and say, boy, oh boy, this, like a third-rate science fiction or fantasy author. Somebody where I read 6 of his books 30 years ago. And somebody who wasn't born yet 30 years ago. Somebody whose parents hadn't met yet 30 years ago. Somebody whose parents were in high school 30 years ago. They will hold up one of those books. Those same books. Different covers. Astronomical book price compared to what I paid for it. They'll hold it up and say, I just read this and I thought it was great and here's why. Well, that's incredible. That's just invaluable for me. Because I don't like to think that I am resting on imperfect judgments of books. And I'm always up to rediscover a book. The ultimate goal, right, is to love everything. Can't do it because, as Theodore Sturgeon put it, 90% of everything is crud. But nevertheless, I have the exact opposite response than literary snobs do. When I make up my mind on a book, especially if I make up my mind in a negative sense, there's nothing I would rather like than to be convinced otherwise. I don't just sort of rest on that negative judgment. I want to like that book. It's just I tried and couldn't do it. And if somebody comes along in the face of that, holds up that same book on their Booktube channel and maybe gives me a way to like it, I'll jump at it if it's free or dirt cheap. And question number 8, is there anyone whose book recommendations you will generally always trust? Okay, a little point of order here before we go on. Generally always is gibberish. Always is an absolute. You can't generally always do something. But I get the point. Mostly trust is what I guess the writer of the question meant. And it's a tricky question for me because, again, I'm in the business of recommending books. And I know a lot of people who are in that business. So even the people that aren't in that business, even the people who are recommending books who aren't professional book critics, I have been in that business on and off long enough so that I think automatically of the recommender rather than the book. So if I'm reading a book critic, let's say the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever, and they are laying on and on about a book and it's mostly positive and they're making a few points here and a few points there, I can read it with them in mind rather than with the book in mind and think, okay, well, you would concentrate on that, wouldn't you? Or Well, all right, you're saying this, but I know you have this blind spot, so I know not to trust this. And then in those kinds of reviews, every once in a while, I will be reading and I'll think, oh. Sometimes when you're reading a book review, you think, oh, that was a fantastic point. That was a touch, a hit, a very palpable hit. Well, it doesn't have to be negative either. The baby's back. That she's wandering back and forth from that room to this room and then back again. I think that probably means she wants to go for a little walk, and I'll do that as soon as we finish this tag. What was I saying? What was I bloviating about before you interrupted me, baby bee? You did. Your fans are going to see you again. There you are. Yes. Oh, yes. A hit, a very palpable hit, where I'll be reading somebody. Even the best of book reviewers can get to the point where they're writing about something and they're mostly just covering the ground. But then all of a sudden there'll be a heartfelt point, something sharp and real. It doesn't have to be negative. It can be positive, but it will be real. It will be genuine. I don't know of any better way to really phrase that, but if you know what I mean, then you'll know what I mean. And discovering those points and also knowing their significance helps a lot if you know the writer. If you've read the writer many times or if you know them personally, then you're going to know how much weight to put behind things like that. And that is typically, it's a more complicated sort of multifaceted version of trusting a reviewer. I trust a reviewer to be themselves. And knowing them, I can then trust that I will be able to tell from their review what's what in the book. Not so much whether or not it's worthwhile for me to buy, because if they got it, I'm going to get it without buying it. There's not going to be that leap of a risk. But in terms of whether or not to pay it attention, whether or not to read it, whether or not to review it, and why, it's knowing the reviewer, knowing either their work or themselves or both. I'm going to be able to read their review and get a sense of whether or not there's something real there. And I would like to think, even as a battered and old Bailey hack as I am, I would like to think the same thing is true for me. That if you read my reviews, you're going to be able to tell in them, even if you don't know me all that well, you're going to be able to tell in my reviews what's real and what's not in the book. And the same thing is true for people who aren't professional book critics. It's the same kind of thing. It's more a question of the reviewer, the speaker, than it is about the subject. Friend X, who's not a reviewer, could be going on and on about a book that I don't care about at all, subject matter that I don't care about at all, maybe an author that I either don't know or that I know and have always disliked. But in the midst of their comments, there will be something that will make you go, oh, that was a real point. That was a real point. And any book that can elicit that, I think, is worth revisiting. It's like most of my questions here, it's unhelpfully complicated. So, because the question is there anybody whose recommendations you mostly trust? And I'm in the business of recommending books, so I don't. If somebody says to me, "Oh, this is a good book," part of the read of the question that I'm seeing here is that I will then say, "Oh, so and so said that's a good book," and I believe them, and I can't do that. I just can't do that. So in that sense of mostly trust, no, not ever. But in the sense of listening to what someone has read a book has to say about it and then sifting what is real. Is there really a book here or not? Those notes you can trust. Especially since a lot of times the author won't even know that they're doing it. They won't know that part is jumping out of their review, or in the case of a non-reviewer, out of their conversation. I don't know if that helped any. Probably it's a whole video on its own, and maybe I'll get to that, but not today. That is the what makes me pick up a book tag. And mine, unfortunately, was an amorphous mess. That's probably what you expect if you're asking this question of someone who's not just a book consumer. Being a book critic complicates that relationship in ways that probably made this tag unhelpful. So I apologize for that, but at least I did my best. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. Excuse me, but I'll be back. Thank you, Booktube.